Craig Melvin, welcome to Biscuits and Jam.
I love biscuits. I love jam. I love Southern living, Sid. So I'm happy to be here.
Well, it's great to see you. Great to have you here. First things first, I've got to ask, how's Betty Joe?
You're surprised how many people start with that. Mom is doing fantastic. She's doing better than fantastic. I saw her 2 weekends in a row. She came up to Connecticut where we live. One weekend she came just to sort of hang out. She spent several days, and then she came back, and Dad came back with her the very next weekend because our daughter was getting baptized, and it was Easter. So we spent Easter together, baptism together, and I did the math. In March into April, I saw Betty Joe 9 days. Which is pretty good. It's pretty good.
That's pretty good. That's a lot of Betty Joe time. That's great.
And she's not wild about traveling either. So especially coming to the Northeast when it's not the late spring or summer, there's a constant complaint about how cold it is and the temperature, and even after 13 years, it's still brand new to her. She's doing very well.
It's not Columbia. Craig, first, I just got to say congrats on the new children's book.
Thanks.
It's called I'm Proud of You, and it's beautifully done. I've got a copy sitting right here. When did you first come up with this idea?
A couple years ago, I put out a book. I wrote a book. It was a love letter to my father, who struggled with addictions and struggled with a host of things for most of his life. And then several years ago, cleaned up and is now the kind of father and grandfather that I wish he had been when I was a kid. And I wrote that book, Pops, during the pandemic. It was cathartic for me. He thoroughly enjoyed it as well, but it took a lot out of me. It was pretty heavy. And so while I was working on that book, someone suggested that I should maybe write something a little lighter the second time. And so I still wanted to write something that mattered to me, but also mattered to someone else that I cared about. So the first time it was a love letter to my dad. This time it's a love letter to my son and my daughter, and also to just fatherhood in general. This was a lot more fun to work on than the first one, and I got just as much out of it.
Yeah. Well, I've got the first book here too, and it's a very, very different book, and I want to talk about that a little bit later. But the two definitely seem connected to me. Those words, the title of the book, I'm Proud of You. I mean, those are some powerful words.
They are, and you don't realize it sometimes. Because you and I we're older gentlemen, not old, just older, you and I both. And I think that when you're young, those formative years, and this is not obviously to diminish I love you, but we say I love you to our children all the time. Every night before I tuck them in, as I'm putting them down, I love you, I love you. We shower them with love. I think sometimes hearing I'm proud of you is just as powerful, if not more powerful. And so I try to, in my daily interactions with my children, I try to tell them that I'm proud of them. And I try to follow it with something very specific so they know that I'm not just blowing smoke. Oh yeah, Dad's proud of me, blah, blah, blah. Of course he is. He's my father. He's contractually obligated to be proud. So I wanted to take the way that I try to treat my children and put it in book form. And it's easy to be proud of our children when they achieve great things, when they graduate from high school and college, when they get that first job, when they ride a bike without training wheels for the first time. But I think that there's even more value in making sure that they know that we're just as proud of them for the micro as we are about the macro. And so that's what the book was about. It was about those those small moments when a kid's growing up and you're able to actually see them do something for the first time. You're able to see them overcome a fear or an obstacle, and you're watching them do something that they maybe didn't think they could do. And you say right after, I'm proud of you. And so that's all the book is. It's a book of the ways in which I have been proud of my son and my daughter over the last 10 and 7 years, respectively.
Well, your kids sound kind of cynical, like mine are. And I'm wondering if they had any constructive feedback for you on this one, or if they got a chance to look at it.
Yes. My daughter's feedback was, this is a book about her brother. She wasn't happy about it. I pointed out that she is featured on literally every page in the book, except 2 pages. And she apparently had gone through and counted that and acknowledged that that was accurate. But she said, well, I'm not on the cover. And so even at 7 years old, she understands that being on the cover is the most important thing. So obviously now, Sid, I'm going to have to write a second book. And the working title is I'm Proud of You Too. So, but it is by and large about my son, because when I wrote the book, my daughter was much younger, and I didn't realize she was going to have as many opinions as she does now. And so it is largely a love letter to fatherhood and rearing my son. But again, she's right there on every page. And I do write about in the book, one of the things I am proud of with regard to him is the kind of brother that he is becoming. And so that was the constructive criticism from her. From him, no surprise, he liked it, and he thought that it was pretty well done. He especially enjoyed the illustrations, and although he did have, it's funny because on the cover he's holding a baseball, and he doesn't play baseball. He's never played baseball. And I may be giving you a little too much inside baseball here, but he plays flag football. But there were some concerns about having a kid holding a football at this age on the cover. And I finally, after...
Yeah, should he be wearing a helmet?
Correct. Where we're at. And I got to be honest with you, Sid, I got to a point, I was like, you know what, fine. It'll be an inside joke with my son and I forever. He'll just hold the baseball. So yes, that's the only piece of the book that is inaccurate, I would say.
Yeah. Well, you're still early in your children's book career, Craig, so there's plenty of time to make adjustments.
Sid, I could write 3 more books after this, 3 more children's book and dedicate 3 more books and dedicate all of them to my daughter, and I would still catch flack. So I've resigned myself to it. But she did, it's funny because she flipped through it, and she's like, she can read fairly well now for a first grader. So she was able to read it, and she flipped through, and she was kind of nodding along. And she also pointed out, she's like, well, this woman who's supposed to be our grandma, that doesn't look like Gigi. I'm like, sweetie, I didn't take pictures of family members, and that's not how this process works. And she's like, well, but Dell kind of looks like Dell. And so finally I took the book away from her, and that was it. It's a lot of unsolicited feedback.
It's all part of the learning experience.
Yes, Sid. That's a good way of looking at it.
I want to come back to the book in a second, but first I want to ask you a little bit about growing up in South Carolina. You're born and raised in Columbia, which is a state capital. Tell me a little bit about the house that you grew up in.
Oh, that's a very specific question, Sid. Good. That's a good question. I grew up in a neighborhood called Pine Valley off Broad River Road. We moved there in 1986. Prior to 86, we lived in some apartments also in Columbia. And in 86, we moved after my first grade year. A little more space, a little nicer, had a front yard, backyard. It was a neighborhood. We moved into a neighborhood. It was one of those neighborhoods where back in the mid to late 80s, it was an accurate representation of the demographics of our country. I mean, it really was a melting pot. And one of the things that's sad about the neighborhood now is it's become, white flight personified. Everyone's sort of left the neighborhood. They've moved farther out, bigger houses, nicer neighborhoods, better schools. And my parents have stayed, and everyone else has either moved or died. And I think, unfortunately, that's the case in a lot of neighborhoods from that era. Growing up, for me, it could not have been, in terms of location, more idyllic. It really was. I still have fond memories of riding my bike around the neighborhood. I walked to school. I walked to high school. I didn't get a car until I was in college because I didn't need one, and my parents were really cheap. So, yeah.
Well, I think that's great. It really sort of paints a picture, and what a place to grow up. I mean, to be exposed to all those different types of families, and really is kind of a little snapshot of America.
And it's funny because I still keep in touch with a lot of folks from the old neighborhood. And my mother, who is the NBC of Pine Valley, if you will, provides me with regular updates, large and small.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned your mom, because I want to kind of zero in on a very specific part of the house, and that is the kitchen. We always talk a little bit about food on this podcast. So tell me, I know your mom's a great cook, and we've talked to your mom about her cooking, and I've heard you talk about it plenty on the show. But tell me about, what does your mom look like in that kitchen, and what are some things that she was making on the regular?
Oh gosh, back then, it's funny because, again, we're talking late 80s, early 90s, before everyone became concerned about, carbs and health and fat and sugar and all that stuff. So, growing up, there was a lot of rice and gravy, fried pork chops during the week, not uncommon, fried chicken during the week, not uncommon. If she was in a rush, we'd get a spaghetti with meat sauce. We would get grits sometimes during the week for breakfast. I mean, Mom spent a lot of time in the kitchen. In fact, there was a time when I would say between the ages of 7 and 11 or 12, my mom would actually bake cakes and sell them to people. She ran sort of a cake baking business. She did a lot of baking, but she was always cooking something. There was always a meal being prepared. I was probably 15 before I realized that wasn't necessarily common. And she even now talks about missing that part of being a parent. When you have kids to cook for and kids' friends to cook for, there's always a reason to cook. Well, now it's just the two of them. And then so she doesn't cook as often. But her mac and cheese is the stuff of legend still. She also made a great potato salad. In fact, I guess I can tell you. I don't know. Maybe I don't think it's embargoed. There may or may not be a Today Show cookbook in the works.
Okay.
And one of the recipes is perhaps maybe going to be my mom's potato salad, which again, it's not healthy. There's nothing low fat in it, and she could care less. What the challenge, Sid, sometimes is when you say to her, you're like, Mom, I really like this thing that you made. Can you give me the recipe? And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, well, walk me through how you made it. I said, well, it's a little bit of this, and I take maybe a half stick, and then well, how long do you kind of just have to look at it. And so what ends up happening, it happened with the mac and cheese recipe. It's happening with the potato salad, even banana pudding. She spends several days trying to recreate a dish and actually measuring stuff, and she gets a little frustrated because she doesn't understand why people who might go online can't just like look at something and say, you know what, I could use a little bit more butter, or maybe I should probably cook this a little longer. And so we've had to, even just yesterday and the Today Show test kitchen, our lead food stylist was trying to recreate this particular recipe that my mom had made for the website. And she basically said, she was like, your mother's measurements that she sent, these are not right. And so then I have to call Mom. I'm like, Mom, you said, oh no, that's not enough. That's my fault. So there's a lot of that, but that's how we cook in the South. It's this measuring cup and the spoons. These are newfangled gadgets. That we're just getting used to.
Well, your mom's mac and cheese, I can tell you, is very popular on southernliving.com, and people love that recipe. They are obsessed with it. So she's doing something right, for sure.
Our apologies to all of the cardiologists south of the Mason-Dixon, because we have it in our house, but my wife only permits me to have it, maybe a half dozen times a year. But growing up, I mean, I was eating that mac and cheese every week and not just the mac and cheese. I mean, Mom would make, collard greens, like foods that are now eaten on special occasions were foods that we would consume sometimes on just a random Wednesday. And I miss that. But that being said, if I had continued to live like that, Sid, I probably wouldn't be having this conversation with you right now. So there is that. Moderation has become the key.
Moderation is key.
Do you remember Kool-Aid?
Oh, sure.
So growing up, there was always, at least in our fridge, you had a pitcher of Kool-Aid for the kids and a pitcher of sweet tea for the adults. It was always there. Took it for granted.
Yeah, with about 900 grams of sugar in it. Yeah.
Oh, the sugar would pool at the bottom of the pitcher. And again, I was probably in the 10th or 11th grade, and before I realized, well, you know what? Maybe that's not healthy. When my mother, to this day, when she comes to Connecticut and we'll go out to dinner, she'll order sweet tea. And I'm like, Mom, why do you do this? Because the waitress invariably, they look at her like she's she's got three heads and like sweet tea. She's like, yeah, it's like tea with sugar in it. And they're like, oh man, we have unsweetened tea, but we can bring you some sugar. And it's this little game that she likes to play, and she gets exasperated. And
yeah, that doesn't work.
No,
that doesn't work.
Doesn't. And then I sit there and I watch her take like 8 packets of sugar and stir it in. I'm like, Ma, you're not supposed to have the sugar. That's why they don't offer sweet tea at the restaurants anymore. We've all discovered that sugar kills you. And she's decided that if she's going to go out, she's at least going to go out all sugared up, I suppose.
Well, I like her style.
So do I.
I know that your mom is also a huge fan of the holidays, and I think she strikes me as someone who starts planning for the holidays early.
Oh.
I mean, she's planning her menu probably a couple months in advance.
There's no planning because it's literally the same menu. I mean, the menu. I don't think the menu's changed in 25 years.
What's the menu?
What has changed is the location, because we now do it at my brother's house, and she prepares less because she's gotten older, and it can be a little much for her. The menus so for Thanksgiving, it's a fried turkey. My brother fries the turkey. There's also a traditional turkey. There's a ham. There's chicken. There's dressing, not stuffing, never stuffing, only dressing. And there are 2 pans of stuffing. You've got the traditional stuffing, but then you've got my favorite stuffing, which is the stuffing that includes chicken gizzards. And
you mean the dressing?
The dressing, excuse me. The dressing.
Yeah.
The dressing that includes chicken gizzards, which, by the way, when I got married, before I was married, my wife was at Thanksgiving, and she was like, "What is that?" I was like, "What do you mean, what is this?" She's like, "What does that mean?" I'm like, "Gizzards? You've never had a gizzard?" And it took me 5 minutes to sort of explain the gizzard dressing concept. Mac and cheese, of course, collard greens that up until, I'd say, 5 years ago, she had been using ham hocks. And I think either her doctor or someone convinced her that she should at least switch to smoked turkey wings and smoked turkey legs. So we have that. We have black-eyed peas. We have rice. We have the potato salad. And then there's usually, for dessert, there's always a pound cake and a banana pudding. So that's the set menu. Then you have people who feel compelled to bring something. And so there ends up being enough.
Because God forbid you should run out.
Correct.
You know?
Correct. Yeah. But every year people bring more food, and it's like 3 days of Thanksgiving dinner. And the Christmas meal, by the way, is the exact same. There's no deviation between the two. You get the exact same menu at Christmas. And we've come to really take solace in the fact that the menu hasn't changed in 30 years. We love that. And by the way, every now and then there's talk of a change, and we will pick up the phone and we're like, "Hey, I talked to Aunt such and such, and she said maybe you weren't thinking about blah, blah, blah." I will tell you, Sid, the one thing that we did cut out about a decade ago, and this was a function of no one else in the family being able to make it. Have you ever had a chitlin?
I have, yeah, sure.
So we used to have chitlins at, Thanksgiving, Christmas. We would have chitlins. My grandma could make them. My great aunt could make them. And there was one other family member that could make them. And the elderly, and they eventually died off. So there was no one around to make the chitlins. And it was also the one dish where there had become a consensus opinion that the scent of the chitlins as they were being prepared may not have been worth the actual taste of the, and there were only like 3 or 4 people left eating them too, so the chitlins got knocked off. And
they're kind of famous for that. They're kind of famous for that smell when you're cooking them.
Oh yeah. So we stopped the chitlins.
Do you have a favorite, Craig? I mean, of all those things on the menu, is there one that, you kind of, that's always got to be there? That's the one you look forward to?
Definitely the mac and cheese, always.
Yeah.
But secondarily, my brother's fried turkey. He does. I mean, he fries the hell out of that turkey. And it's not just the actual frying of the turkey. There is a ceremony that it coincides with the actual preparation. So he rubs it, he injects it. The turkey gets named by the cousins. They develop a name for the turkey, which I know is a little morbid. And then we stand around and we watch him lower the turkey into the boiling vat of peanut oil or whatever oil he's using that year. I think last year was peanut. But and then we stand around and we smoke cigars and we drink a little brown liquor and just shoot the breeze while the turkey cooks. And it's this is probably going to sound terrible. I think we've also come to enjoy it because the cigar smoke, the turkey smoke, it's so much for the kids and a lot of our wives that they don't even come outside. So we just get to stand around by ourselves.
You can actually have a little moment to yourselves. Yeah.
And then sometimes we'll also we'll exaggerate how long it's going to take for the turkey to cook just to buy us some more time.
Yeah.
But now that I'm saying this to you, Sid, there are going to be some people who are probably hip to our game.
Well, we do one every year too. We don't do the cigars, but we do the turkey, and I love it. Can't beat it. I want to go back to your dad for a second.
Yeah.
You mentioned the book that you wrote about him called Pops and all his struggles with alcoholism and how hard that was for the whole family. Why did you want to share that story?
It's a good question, Sid, because I'm one of those people that tends to believe that we live in an era where people generally overshare. We share too much. But during the course of therapy, my therapist at the time convinced me that, first of all, I had developed some issues that were the result of unresolved issues with my father, things that I just had not talked to him about, things that had affected me for years, and I didn't realize it until I started talking about them, and at that point, writing about them. And she maintained that there were literally millions of people who had similar stories that might benefit from reading my story, hearing my story. And so I did it for them. I did it to help myself heal, but I also did it for my dad. Because, as our parents age, they start to reflect a little bit more on their lives and their children and their regrets. And my father had started to do this thing where every time we hung out or I talked to him, even when he had gotten sober, he would apologize for all those years that he felt like he'd wasted and all the time that he felt like he'd squandered with us because of the addiction, as a result of the gambling, as a result of the drinking. And I wanted him to know that we'd forgiven him, that I'd forgiven him, that he was and is partially responsible for the man I've become. And so I wanted him to know that before he left this earth. So it was a love letter to my dad, first and foremost. And I made that clear with the publisher before I started this process. I said, if the book helps people, great. That's obviously one of the chief goals. But the primary goal is to write a book about redemption and forgiveness and love that my father can pick up and read and can say, oh, okay, it's all here. And it was also, Sid, to be able to interview my dad. I spent 6-7 hours just peppering him with all of the questions that I wanted to ask him over the years for this book. And I recorded all of those conversations. That was a highlight for me. So,
yeah. Did you share this new book with him?
I did not, actually, deliberately. I wanted him, first of all, he's a bit of a Luddite, and the digital version, he wouldn't have read it because he doesn't have an email address. And no, that's not a joke. He does not have an email address. By the way, he also doesn't have a credit card or a debit card. And,
wow.
Oh, if you only knew, Sid, if you only knew. And I'm, even to this day, I'm amazed that he's able to function in modern society. But somehow he does. I digress. So the hard copy of the book, I actually just got my first one a couple of weeks ago. So I wanted to give him a hard copy so that he could enjoy that. So he knew that I was working on it. And he hadn't seen it. And by the way,
well, I'm sure he'll be very excited to see it.
I think you're right. My mom saw it. She was very excited.
Yeah.
She was very proud. It's funny how, Sid, I don't care how old you are or what you do professionally or any like modicum of success, worldly success that you might achieve. Knowing your parents are proud of you, it matters. It's even now. Like, in the mornings, I'll get a few million people that'll watch the show, which is great. I don't take that for granted. It's not lost on me. But it's when I get a text message from my mom who say, oh, I saw that interview you did with blah, blah, blah. I was good. Uh-huh. Or if you talk to your dad and your dad's like, oh, I saw you that interview you did with Dawn Staley on, oh man, you tell her I said blah, blah. And then it's even after all these years, it makes me feel some sort of way. First of all, to know that they still watch, because I've been doing it for a while now, and they both watch all 3 hours. And I've said to them before, I was like, guys, you don't really have to watch the whole show. Like, every day. Like it's okay. I won't be offended, and they're offended at me even suggesting that they don't watch. What's funny though is I'll get feedback, shall we say? I've got this focus group that I guess my mother has. So someone will text her to tell me something about the show, or they'll text her with a question. Usually it's about a food segment. It's like, I saw Craig trying that dish. Was it really as good as he made it look like it was, or was he just faking for TV? And so invariably a few times every week I have to respond to the focus group text messages that I get from my mother's friends from church.
Well, Craig, I want to ask you about being a dad yourself. And, you've written this really powerful book about your dad. Now you've got this children's book. And you've done all kinds of segments on the Today Show about being a dad. And you've interviewed all sorts of dads in all different kinds of situations. It's such a challenging time to be a dad.
Yep. Yes, it is.
Right now, I think it's always been challenging, but, doing it in 2024 is tough with everything going on, social media and all that. What's some of the best advice that you've gotten through all these interviews and all the talking that you've done about this, about being a dad right now?
The best advice I've gotten, there have been a couple of nuggets. The first came from Carson Daly, who years ago, we were on a shoot and I was sort of lamenting the fact that at that particular point I was traveling a lot more than I do now. And I was missing stuff. I was missing soccer games, and I was missing ballet and gymnastics meets and all that stuff. I was feeling sort of guilty about it. And, he has 4 children. And he said to me, he's like, you got to focus on quality over quantity. And you got to accept the fact that you're not going to be able to be there as often as your wife, because you're working, and the work is important, and you got to make peace with it, or you're going to be guilty for 18 years at least. Focus on quality over quantity. So when I am there, I'm not just physically present, I'm emotionally present. I try to make sure my children know that. But I've also blocked out certain days and activities where, unless there's something terrible has happened in the world, I'm there. So, for instance, I've coached my son's basketball team for the last 3 seasons. It's a mediocre squad, probably a result of the coaching more than anything. But anyway, he enjoys it. I enjoy coaching. I've done it for the last 3 years. And I've got a buddy in town, and he's my assistant coach. And he basically promised me that if I had to travel last minute or do something, that he would step in, which he's done. I block out Wednesday evenings during basketball season so I can always be at practice. And so I carve out that time. And people who work with me, they know that no matter what, I call it dead time. I'm unreachable and untouchable. And I've done the same thing with my daughter, although my daughter, it's different because she has not demonstrated any interest so far, at least, in organized recreational sports. But I try to be physically present as much as humanly possible, because one of the dads told me from the Dad's Got This series on the Today Show, as kids get older, a lot of the things that we think they care about, they don't really care about. And they don't really remember a lot of the stuff that we think that it's going to stay with them forever. They remember, like, looking out from that stage, seeing mom, seeing dad during their play. They remember being at that basketball game and dad, when dad was the coach. They remember that. And I know they remember that because, for years, for me, excuse me, it's dusty in the office, Sid. For years, that was, one of the biggest issues I had with my dad is he just wasn't there. He wasn't physically present. He was at the house, but he wasn't at the baseball games. He wasn't at the basketball games. And it wasn't until I became a father that I realized, well, dang, he wasn't there because he was working third shift for almost 40 years at the post office. He slept during the day. Yeah, he drank too much, and sometimes he was passed out or, up at the corner store. Yeah, that was part of it. But the other part was he just couldn't be there because he was working to provide for his family. And until you have that responsibility, you don't fully appreciate that you kind of have to be there. So, I really, the advice that I've gotten over the years, and I've tried to take it to heart by people who've done it better and done it longer than me.
Craig, I just have one more question for you. I'll end on this one. What does it mean to you to be Southern?
Oh gosh, that's a good last question. For me at least, being Southern, it's not about geography. It's not about being born in Alabama or South Carolina or North Carolina. It's a state of mind. And the older I get, the more I have come to believe that. Perhaps it's because I live outside New York City in Connecticut, and I'm surrounded by a lot of people who rarely travel outside the tri-state area, believe it or not. But it really is, it's a state of mind. It is about being deliberate. It's about being honest. It's about being sometimes slower than the average in terms of speech and walking. It's funny because even now my colleagues will give me grief because it takes me a little bit longer sometimes to get through a story than most of my colleagues. And if we're running tight on time on the Today Show, someone will get in my ear and they'll say, "All right, Craig, I need you to give me your Connecticut read here, not your South Carolina read. We got to save about 10 seconds. So sometimes I'll have to talk deliberately faster than I normally would. But it's a way of life. It's a state. It's why every year I make sure that my kids spend at least a week along the coast in South Carolina. We're back for holidays, and some family members point out that after a few days of me being in South Carolina, they're like, "Oh, your dialect, it's not so nondescript anymore. You're using y'alls again." The twang.
It comes back quick.
It does. It does come back quick. And every now and then when I come back to work, someone will say, "Oh, you've spent some time down south, haven't you?" But listen, I sometimes catch flack in my house because not only do I make grits most weekends, I have them shipped in from Adlu. When we land in Charlotte, I go to Bojangles. I get the chicken biscuit. It's when I'm in Columbia, the very first place that my parents met my now wife's then girlfriend, we had breakfast at Lizard's Thicket on Broadway Road, Columbia. So I still go back to all the same places. I eat all the same things. And some might say it's a little sad that I'm such a creature of habit. I tend to relish in it. I don't know. That's just me.
Well, stay Southern, Craig.
Not worry about that.
And congrats on the book. It's really great. And I know you're excited to get it out in the world. And thanks so much for being on Biscuits and Jam.
Sid, thank you. Thank you so much. Again, I always enjoy Biscuits and Jam. So it's an honor to be here.